So, hello everybody. Welcome to Game Audio Hour number 74. This is our weekly podcast where we watch Skype blow up and Twitch not work, and we go back to Google Hangouts. It's also we happen to discuss game audio stuff, from creative ideas, latest techniques, project experiences, to audio secrets. Here's where you find your in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. Vince, I'm going with you. How are you?
Oh man, I'm doing pretty well. It's September, which means that in addition to the usual game development travails, I'm also dealing with students, and it's always fun to see the new crop of students come in. Some of them are excited about just plain old game design, and there's always a handful that are really interested in audio, so it's always fun talking to those fresh young minds and seeing what they're up to.
Oh, that's nice. How many students you got so far?
Well, the game audio class that I'm teaching is bigger than it's ever been. It's 28 people. It's been crazy. It started out as, a dozen people about 6 or 7 years ago, and then just steadily rising from there. So now we got 28, and I've got my work cut out for me.
It's kind of a cross-section of the popularity of the career game audio, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is.
That's great. That's great. Mike!
How's it going? LA's kind of overcast, actually, but it's still nice and warm, so I can't complain too much.
No rain?
We don't get rain here. You've lived in this area. You know what the deal is. I think we had rain like a couple of months ago. It was just this exciting one-day period, and came and went.
We had rain all day just up the coast.
Well, that's the excitement of Ventura.
Okay.
Fireworks and pollution.
Yeah, that's so true. Hey, Alex, is it raining there?
No, it is not. It is a beautiful, beautiful, what would you call it, late summer, early autumn day over here. And sun is shining. Finally, there's a lot of these huge, they call them cicadas, is what the translation is in the dictionary. They're like a massive cricket with wings.
Yeah. And
they're like that freaking big. As big as my head. Look at that. I mean, they're like that big, and they make this really, really incredible sound that actually kind of sounds like when I first came to Japan, I didn't know what they were because we didn't have them in Australia, and it sounds like some kind of automatic pump.
Oh,
it's
wow.
I think the way that they communicate with the sound and this chirping is so kind of methodical. It actually sounds like an artificial machine. I thought somebody was like pumping up their bike tires with some funky sort of newfangled kind of pump technology, but actually was an insect. So, long and short of that little detour was that they've all gone off to go to sleep for the winter, or whatever they do, gone somewhere.
Yeah, they're only out for a short time, right?
Yeah, so it's nice and quiet again now.
Oh, you caught me. I've been making camera adjustments in between your speech, but dang it. So I hear that there's a new kind of cicada called a BitWig, and that you bought a few of them. Yeah,
I've got one in my ear, right? This is a BitWig right in there. There it is.
Is that the worst segue? Because I'm trying to win that award.
I think you won that award a few episodes ago. I can't remember it was like a nugget of non sequitur, illogic. Anti-logic.
Or ignorant.
Anyway, I thought you guys might be interested to hear a little bit about BitWig, because
I want to know.
I was, as I've mentioned before, during my long commutes in the morning, I've been kind of entertaining myself by reading DAW manuals. That's what happens to you when you spend it's 100 minutes one way, so 200 minutes a day, standing inside a Japanese commuter train. You do crazy things like that. So I read the Logic user guide, which is really interesting and actually sort of made me rethink about Logic, and actually I gained a new appreciation for it. I read the Reaper manual, and I also decided to read the Ableton Live manual, which was interesting, and then I read the BitWig manual, and then I thought, this BitWig thing's kind of interesting. I might have to go and try a demo. I tried a demo, and it's very, very good. So I decided to buy it because somebody was selling it on KVR for cheap.
Ooh.
And I decided to listen to it was like an hour-long interview that somebody did with the guy who's one of the guys at the head of BitWig, just to hear about what it was that they were thinking in creating this new DAW. I mean, we don't need any more. We need new DAWs like we need new equalizer plugins, right? I mean, they basically do the same thing. It's all about workflow and about, which one stirs your creative juices. And so just a little brief bit of history here. BitWig was created by about 3 or 4 guys who were all Ableton employees. And one of those, situations where, of course, no disrespect to anything that Ableton was doing or that was doing wrong or anything like that, but these guys just thought, we've got some ideas, and I think, maybe it'd be cool to try them out and, see where it takes us. So they created this thing called BitWig, and the funny thing is that a lot of people look at BitWig and say, hey, it's got like an arrange view, and it's got a clip launcher view. It's just a copy of Ableton. It's like a poor man's Ableton. What's going on with that? And the interesting thing was their response to that was that, well, the whole idea of creating a new DAW in this day and age is to rethink the whole approach to DAWs and how we're using them. And the fact that these legacy DAWs that we're using, like Pro Tools, Cubase, Logic, are basically sort of software tape machines. Whereas really, in this day and age, do we really need to be using something that operates like a tape machine? Their approach basically was that, well, if you're going to take a modern look at a DAW, a pattern-based, like clip-based way to use it, in this day and age, just seems like the most obvious solution for the way that people are writing music and the way that people are performing music. Mm-hmm. So therefore, their question to the DAW market would be not why do we need another clip-launching DAW? Their question is, why don't you have clip launching yet? Because it's just such a basic, fundamental way to use a DAW for experimentation and for live performance. However, the way that they see Ableton doing it, where it's very much a sort of a dichotomy, where it's split down the middle, you're using this or you're using this, seemed to them to be a little bit restrictive. And also, I was kind of happy to hear that they looked at some of the earliest examples of DAWs, which are, yes, indeed, trackers, and the fact that music is split up into these patterns that play, and you schedule a pattern to play in a certain sequence, and there's your song. That being the earliest incarnation, is there something that they can take from that and bring forward to this modern clip launching kind of approach that Ableton started? And that's what resulted in BitWig. So I've made a short list of 4 interesting things that you might be interested to know about what BitWig can do and the reason why it's kind of interesting. Number 1, now I don't know if you can do this in live, but I'd be interested to know, every clip in BitWig, you can actually tell it what to do when it finishes. You can tell a clip to repeat itself, which is like the default behavior, just like live does. Or you can tell it to stop, or you can tell it to go to the arrange view and play that, or you can tell it to move down to the next pattern. Now that's kind of interesting, because that means that somebody like me, who's used to approaching DAWs in a very non-horizontal fashion, means that if I wanted to, I kind of can use BitWig's clip system just like a tracker, because basically you just set everything to just progress to the next pattern. Mm-hmm. You can also set it to progress to the next pattern after a certain amount of loops. Mm-hmm. So you could say, like, 5 loops on this pattern and then go to the next one, then 2 loops on that one and then go back to the first one. So you can actually set each clip to sort of program it to do what you want. And that opens up a whole new kind of approach to using clips for composition, which, I don't know, can you do that with live? Can you take the clip in the clip view and tell it what to do when it finishes, or does it just automatically loop?
Yes, it's called follow actions, and you can set up a bunch of different types of follow actions in Ableton.
Okay, well, there we go. So that's nothing new then. Thank you.
Well, the granularity at which you're describing, I'm not sure if it can be delayed for 5 loops or anything like that. But I'm kind of the wrong guy to ask in that regard, because I've used it at its basic level, because I'm typically in the arrange view, not the clip view. But I do know in the clip view you can do follow actions, and I was just finding a link up here that said something about it.
Okay, well, that was one interesting. Now, the other interesting thing that this might interest Mike. So the whole idea with BitWig is they've taken a leaf out of Reaper's book, whereas Reaper tries to create this environment where data is data, and there's less focus on the category of data. Is it audio? Is it MIDI? Is this an audio track? Is this a MIDI track? What is it? And what they've done is, obviously with audio, you have your audio clip gain envelope. So you can have, a section of audio here, and you can have a sort of a gain envelope just for this little clip of audio in the arrange view or in the clip view. Now, the interesting thing that they've done with BitWig is they've thought that, well, why shouldn't that kind of easy functionality for arranging the volume through the playback of an audio clip, why shouldn't that be available just as easily for MIDI notes? So a MIDI note shouldn't have to be a trigger on, trigger off, and a trigger on velocity, and any kind of aftertouch or breath control or anything in between. Why not just give MIDI note gain a control right up there at the top surface layer, so that you can take your MIDI note, you can start it, and then through the MIDI note you can adjust the gain really, really easily right there. So again, that's not something that's impossible to do, in any other DAW. Sure, you just grab your CC 7. Yeah, and there you go. You've got your MIDI note gain through the actual playback of the note. However, it's kind of nice. Again, it's just a rethinking of workflow to put that right at the top surface layer and say, right, here it is. If you want to adjust the volume for your note in the middle of a note, then just do it like this. Same way that you would with an audio clip.
You can draw that in on top of the MIDI note inside Piano Roll or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Because you would do that in a separate window for Ableton at the velocity or the what's the word I'm looking for? But anyway, below the Piano Roll view is that area where you can pick your
right.
and then set it there, but it's not on top of the actual MIDI note.
Right. Now, there's one other thing which may interest sound designers. This one might interest Vince. Is if you select multiple notes or multiple entities, you get a little histogram view of the values that all of those entries have for whichever parameter that you're looking at. So, for example, if you make a recording and you've got velocities all over the place, you select all the notes, and it will show you like a histogram of all of the velocities in this selection. So if you've got a whole lot of velocities which are around, sort of 64 or so, then there'll be like this big curve at the top of 64, and then sort of trailing off to the side depending on how many quiet notes and how many loud notes you played. And that means that, for example, normalizing any value is really easy. You just go to histogram and you just slam it one way or slam it the other way, or just set it all in the middle, whichever you like. And that's kind of cool for randomizing values as well. There's like a chaos parameter that you can set on this histogram, so that if you want to, for example, randomize pan, instead of just having everything in the middle of the histogram, you just put some chaos on there, and it'll all kind of trickle out to the side, and it becomes all random. So again, that kind of thing is pretty easy to do in any other DAW. However, it's not to the degree that it is in BitWig, where it's a button right there, you click it, and you got the histogram, and you just go for it.
Yeah, that does seem pretty cool. I know lately I've been messing around with various synths and VSTs where they'll actually, instead of doing something like having key note-based articulations, they'll have separate articulations based on velocity range. And I find that all these, why do I have a velocity that's below 10 somewhere? I know I heard it somewhere, and just having a view there, and I could grab that one and just shift it over. And, that seems like it would be really quite useful.
Yeah, I think one thing that the guy said in the interview was that, DAWs don't really need to be all things to all people. However, they said they noticed it's interesting that the take-up of their product that they've had has mostly been Logic and Cubase users, like specifically Logic and Cubase users. Most Logic and Cubase users, I don't know about you, Mike, but they'll approach something like Ableton Live, and it's so different that you just sort of, well, I kind of understand how it works, but if you ask me now to sit down for 3 days and write a piece of music with this, I think I would be really struggling. So they're trying to sort of kind of get this middle point between something like Ableton Live, which has the flexibility of that live performance, and the sort of very modern approach, probably maybe geared towards more dance music kind of approach. At least this is the way that they described it. and the other side, which is sort of the more traditional horizontal, like Logic and Cubase. So sort of trying to strike a middle zone down the middle. And yeah, I've been looking to get into one of these kinds of tools like Live, just to sort of experiment around a little bit. And I could never, for some reason, Live was always, it felt there was like pushing something uphill with Live. And for some reason, it didn't quite gel. I mean, when in the interview, he said, yeah, we found that most people who come to BitWig have tried Live, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't seem to really fit with them. And so, they try our product, and for whatever reason, because they're going for this sort of middle ground between the two, it just kind of works for them. And so, yeah, on a technical note, something rather interesting, BitWig is actually written in Java.
Yeah.
That's amazing, because...
like latency with the operating system or anything.
Yeah, the actual DSP engine itself is like a solid core of C, one of the variants of C or something like that. So the actual DSP engine is not Java. It's just the graphic user interface layer that's controlled by Java. And it's kind of when they set out to do this, their first objective was to make something that was flawlessly cross-platform.
Mm.
And that actually kind of helps me because here at home I use a Mac and at work I need to use Windows. And yeah, it's interesting. Like using Java, I don't know about you guys, but my experience with Java has always been like clunky. Like Java desktop apps, they're always like a bit sort of clunky and a bit, you're just not responsive or just kind of flaky somehow.
Well, they always represent it.
What was that?
Sorry, go ahead. I was just saying they always represent a lowest common denominator approach to UI design, and
right.
you gain in universality what you lose in taking advantage of the specific fast stuff that individual operating systems tend to offer.
Right. Yeah, for the BitWig interface is really, really good though. I mean, it's just really. Actually, I've always complained about Logic being a little bit sluggish on this computer. BitWig is really snappy. It's really unusual. You think, wow, this is actually Java. That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my summary would be if BitWig is not going to like revolutionize anything that you do. If you're an Ableton user, you probably wouldn't find anything in BitWig that you would make it worth making any kind of switch or anything. But definitely, if you're a Logic, Cubase, Pro Tools kind of person, or a Reaper user, and you're sort of thinking about trying something a little bit different, and you'd like to take advantage of some of the live performance capabilities or just non-linear performance capabilities, yeah, BitWig's very interesting. So there you go.
One thing I noticed. Oh, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
One thing I noticed from the website is that BitWig can open multiple projects at the same time. Mm-hmm. And judging from the screenshot, it looks like it has a tabbed approach, as you might have for a browser window or something like that. Mm-hmm. And this element is actually kind of subtly exciting to me because it's something I've always wanted to take advantage of, is having different timelines in memory at once. And this is a concept that various DAWs have struggled with throughout time, coming up with kind of awkward compromises. And Logic, for example, I think the best thing that could be said about opening simultaneous projects in Logic is that it is theoretically possible, but you'd never actually want to do it. So if BitWig can kind of multiply load different projects in an elegant way that doesn't impose too much of a processing hit when you jump between them and lets you copy and paste between them elegantly, that's kind of exciting.
Yeah, the interface is sort of taking a leaf out of Live, so everything's sort of on one window. There's no windowings unless you've got external plugins happening, and so that means that switching a tab between from one project to another it's just redrawing the one interface. So it's not like Logic where you've got separate windows that can be opened all over the place. So I find it very, it's very streamlined. It's important to note that the DSP engine can only be active for one project at a time. So when you switch from one project to another, the DSP engine gets turned off from the previous one and then turned on in the one that you choose.
How smart is it about multiply instantiating the same plugins? If you've got the same plugins in different projects, is it smart enough to know, hey, I don't need to load 50 plugins again because I've already got them for this other project, and all I need to do is just look at the different instrumentation in memory. How does it handle that, and how fast is the process of jumping back and forth?
Good question. I don't know. I mean, I've tried jumping back and forth with very small projects, and of course the kind of stuff that I use tends to be more CPU intensive than disk read-write intensive and memory intensive. So I don't really know. I don't know actually. I mean, with a small project, it's just as you would imagine. You click there and you've got another project right there. But if you had a really, really large kind of Shapiro-esque gigantuan project with 50 bazillion tracks and 14 tracks just for the Wagner horn, then I don't know. I don't really know how it would handle that.
I'll tell you why I'm interested, and this might be an interesting digression that everyone else might have thoughts on. There's a kind of approach to composition that I've always wanted to take that I find really awkward when I'm limited to one project at a time, and that is to segregate ideas and experiments from what I'll call the working queue in progress. So imagine you want to play with a lot of beats and textures and then finally pick a few that you like and then throw them in the actual queue. Have a separate workspace separate from the queue is very handy just in terms of keeping different types of data apart from each other. And what I end up doing in Logic is saying, okay, so measure 1,000, which is 8 hours into my project, is going to be the secret area where I'm going to do all my experiments and try different things, and I'll put a bunch of markers so I can jump back and forth to where I'm actually working on a queue. And I end up jumping between different parts of the timeline. And it's cumbersome, and if my main queue ever gets really long, suddenly it spills over to my experiment area, and then there's havoc. So if you could somehow just isolate different aspects of your project, your sketches, your drafts, and put them all in their nice little enclosed space and have them not trod on each other, I think from a workflow perspective, there would be a lot of benefit to that sort of thing. And I've never really been able to do it.
You might like to check out Studio One version 3 from PreSonus. Studio One has like a scratch pad function. So you've got your horizontal timeline. You can sort of drag across a section of the window on this side, and this side, it uses all the same track hierarchy that you've set up. However, it's sort of basically like a secondary sort of a scratch pad sandbox area where you can just fiddle around with ideas. If there's anything that you create here that you like, you can just pull it right across into your proper arrange section. It's basically just two concurrent project areas, whereas this one is sort of the real section, which is what gets rendered, and this is just sort of like a anything goes scratch pad area. So I think they might have created that feature specifically with what you're describing in mind, that people want to have, just like an area to play around with stuff, and when it's all set up, then they want to bring it into their main arrange section. So you might want to check that out.
That does sound pretty cool, as long as the scratch pad doesn't feel too constrained, like there aren't a lot of interface constraints, so you don't feel like you're in a second-class area.
Yeah, with the way that Studio One does it is really neat. It's basically just a divider down the middle of your arrange view, and this side is the scratch pad, and this side is your main section. They both can be scrolled independently, and when this one is playing, nothing happens over this side. It's just purely just for ideas.
Nice, nice.
Well, I want to try out BitWig. I had the demo for a while, but two things I ran into. One of them is probably obvious. I wasn't able to get BitWig to play Ableton packs, things that you download from the Ableton website. I was curious if they kind of found a way to sneak those open inside BitWig. And the other one was that I use a US 2400 Tascam motorized faders device, and it didn't work. I know in the future, or at least at the time in the future, they were going to add some really high-end capabilities to use any interface, any physical interface with their software. Did they incorporate that yet?
I don't know about your device, but I do know that the guy said that, interestingly, BitWig is kind of on the forefront at the moment of integration with a whole world of unusual controllers and like next generation controllers. And what's the one? Is there one called the C-board? Is that it? The C-board. The C-board controller that gives you, vertical movement on the piano keyboard, and all the different kind of funky controllers that are now using the new MIDI spec. Interestingly, BitWig is putting a lot of effort into making sure their product is on the forefront of next generation MIDI. So yeah, I don't know specifically about your device, but I know that's one thing that they're prioritizing in their development.
I wonder if I can contact them and say, can you make this work? And if it's like something as simple as like their tech team adding a line to the API or something.
Yeah, I think if anything, it's just exciting to see new, especially with BitWig, it's simply all they're doing is trying to look at the workflow of the way people use software these days. Look at the kind of little hacks that people are having to do to get around the workflow constraints that their software puts them into, and then just trying to respond to that. And so, yeah, anything. No, we don't need another DAW, just like we don't need any more EQ plugins. But when there are new EQ plugins that try to approach the same process that we all do all day, every project, it's always exciting just to see what kind of thought goes in. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Often some things that I saw in BitWig, I thought that's cool. I might want to try that in Renoise because I know I can do it there. It's just I've never bothered to actually try and do it. So yeah, it's exciting.
I'm still waiting on Ableton to give me 5.1. I've been waiting a long time, Ableton.
To give you what?
5.1 surround.
Ah, right.
Just taking too damn long.
Yeah,
so I'm interested in BitWig if it has 5.1. Does it have it?
You can probably do a Googs check faster than I can recall it.
All right. So you guys, what are the features that you guys would want out of your DAW of choice? Mike is Logic and Vince is Sonar. What would you want that you're missing?
Well, I had this dream for a long time of a DAW and a notation package that are perfectly co-integrated. And I've searched for this in vain for a long time and end up trying to occasionally squeeze some mileage out of the sequencing abilities of a program like Sibelius or struggling with the notation abilities of a program like Logic. Logic is, of DAWs, probably the closest I found to having a usable notation facility, but it's just a couple of ergonomic abilities short of really fitting into a workflow. So for me, that would be a real dream, is to see something that was as sophisticated as Sibelius and usable in terms of its interface, merged with something as powerful as Logic.
Vince, what do you got?
Well, these days I'm rocking the Iwi a lot. No, I mean, I really do use the Iwi for everything. So every instrument in the orchestra I record with an Iwi, and the only things that I use a MIDI keyboard for are for, keys and harp and other things like that. And I really wish that I had better control over what's going on in my controller panes. So with the Iwi, there's a lot of controller data, and that controller data is really linked to the notes that I'm playing. And I have control over the notes, and I have control over the controller data, and I can edit that stuff. But I wish that there was a better way to actually edit it in a way that the note is smart enough to recognize that the controller data is linked with the play of that note. So something simple like, I want to resize this note. Let me resize also all that controller data that went with it. My bend that went with it, my byte sensor that went with it, my use of the portamento switch during that note, things like that. And I've actually been looking around at some of the other DAWs, and I don't think that anything does something like what I would want with how controller data is tied to the actual note like that by default or as an option.
Have you looked into, whenever you say as an option, I immediately think of Reaper. Have you looked in to see if Reaper can do it?
I've looked into that, and it doesn't seem like that's a possibility.
Okay. Mike, have you ever tried Lily Pond?
I haven't.
Lily Pond, do you know what LaTeX is? LaTeX is a typesetting, it's like the granddaddy of Markdown.
Indeed, it's very popular in academia, or at least it used to be.
The reason why it's popular with academia is just because the content of what you're writing is very separate from the formatting, and the formatting is dictated by traditional, sort of rules and traditions, so that academic papers look the same, and then the content is separated from that. So LilyPond takes the same approach. So if you're not adverse to using a text editor, and you're okay with, like, saying take a MIDI data from your track and putting it through some kind of converter, LilyPond, again, like LaTeX, says that, well, basically, music notation has a whole range of formalities and rules and customs that go to it. So is a graphic user interface for editing musical notation really the smartest idea, when all the user is going to have to do is, painstakingly make sure that they are within the boundaries of these traditions and rules for music notation? Instead, have all that happen automatically, and then you just type in your music data and what you want the music to do on this side, and then output it to music notation, which has all been streamlined and formalized properly by an automated system. Either Mike is, like, incredibly moved by what I'm saying, or he's actually frozen.
Oh, I thought I saw him moving.
No, I think, well, you guys seem to be frozen to me, which means that I might be frozen to you.
No, we're good. We're all good.
Oh, there we go. We're back. And anyway, LilyPond is obviously not the best approach if you need sort of need to quickly switch back and forwards between your notation and actual music data that's playing within a DAW. But if you've got the music and you said, right, this is all finished, I'm not going to touch the music anymore. Now it's about just getting it into notation and having it look super crispy professional. And I don't want to be, like, squinting at, dragging beams and dots around and, oh, it's on the wrong side, get back that side. Oh, no, I slipped. LilyPond seems like an interesting solution. It's an open source not scripting language. What would you call it? You used to be a programmer, didn't you, Carl? What do you call that? Something like LaTeX. It's not scripting. It's
like a markup language.
Markup language, yeah. That's where I was going to go. Markup.
Markup language. For music notation. So if you go to lilypond.org, there's actually, if you search, I think there's actually live LilyPond interpreter. So you have the text on this side, and you have a live preview of what you're creating on the other side.
How do you spell it?
Lily, Lilypond, lilypond.org.
Gotcha. I put too many L's.
Yeah, so that might be something that it's free, and obviously if you have the patience to go through the slightly different workflow, and you're not thinking to edit music, you just want to take your music and then output notation, it's probably an excellent alternative if you can't afford Sibelius or you don't have Logic.
What's the input to the markup language? Are you typing in descriptions of your notation, or are you taking a standard MIDI file?
You are at its core level, you're typing in textual descriptions of your music data. That's at its core level. So I guess for I don't know, I haven't looked into it beyond just seeing what the webpage was about and thinking that it was really cool, but I guess if you have data that you've come out of your DAW, which of course most of us would in that situation, I would imagine that you'd probably need to put it through some kind of converter that will convert the MIDI, like a MIDI file, into LilyPond code. So if you really desperately need, like, properly formatted notation, and you don't have the budget for Sibelius, or you don't foresee yourself needing notation very often, then LilyPond seems like a really good solution.
An interesting question that comes to my mind is, do you have to explicitly recreate some data that was implicit in your MIDI sequence before you ported it over to this textual language? For example, slurs. You can quasi-algorithmically guess where a slur is by looking for overlap between MIDI. And once I can type in your notation data, or maybe there's some kind of porting tool that'll vacuum up a standard MIDI file, but then is it smart enough to make those inferences, or do you have to kind of re-specify phrasing and articulations and other things that might be implicit in MIDI data, and is that information lost?
That's a really good question. I would imagine that that would depend on the converter, because I think at its core level, it assumes that you're going to interact with it via text files in a LilyPond code format. I guess, yeah, the actual MIDI file converter that converts into those text files, that I guess is where that kind of functionality would be included, because because you're just basically typing in note data. If you want a slur, you tell it to put a slur here. Yeah, anyway, we should check it out.
Yeah.
That does sound interesting, yeah.
Kind of interested, Mike, because talking about between Logic and Sibelius, I mean, how often do you start pieces in Logic versus Sibelius?
It really depends on whether what I'm doing in Logic is intended for production, or if it's meant to be a mock-up of something that's going to be recorded by a live ensemble. And if something is being recorded if something is meant for production and there's no live instruments involved, no live musicians, instruments aren't alive, I typically won't involve Sibelius at all. There would be no reason to. It's really for printing out music for human beings. I'll actually back up and say that's true 90% of the time. There might be cases where the musical content is so layered and notey that I can't rely on myself being able to play it in real time. So occasionally I might use Sibelius as a composition tool proper, even if there are no human beings on the other end of production. If I'm writing for a live ensemble, it could go either way. Sometimes I will compose in Sibelius, or I'll compose in paper, then kind of input my written notation to Sibelius. But if the music is linear, if it has an improvisational quality, if there's something about it that connects to real time, I might start in Logic, bring it into Sibelius, and then kind of sift through what I've improvised and translate it into trying to shift over to a more vertical way of thinking about the music. So for me personally, it can go either way, and it would really be nice to have a fluid way of making that transfer. I should mention that sometimes I'll make it concrete. So I'm working on a commissioned concert piece right now, and the end result will be in Sibelius because I'll be producing a score. But along the way, I need to make mock-ups for the person commissioning the piece. And although Sibelius has some ability to produce emulations, and you can augment it with the Sibelius notation player, etc., if you want to make something really sound convincing, you need to bring it over to Logic and then hand tweak the articulations and so forth. So in that case, I will sometimes export from Sibelius into Logic, and there's a lot of cleanup involved and extracting things that are on the same staff and then splitting it among different tracks in Logic, etc. So the short answer to a very simple question is all the time.
Okay. Hey, I know that before you were messing around with Note Performer. Has that helped at all? Is that not part of your workflow anymore?
I'm actually experimenting with it right now. For our listeners who aren't familiar with it, it's a plugin for Sibelius that purports to be an entire set of virtual instruments in a box, so that if you create a standard instrument in Sibelius, instead of routing it through the built-in sounds in Sibelius, you can pipe it to this box, and it will come up with its own internal sample libraries. I think it's a mixture of samples and maybe modeled acoustic stuff, because it's by Wallander, and they specialize in acoustic modeling. But what it offers you is a better sound quality and some type of performance AI where it looks at the score, tries to figure out things, little variations in tempo and articulation and slurring, all the things I was talking about before, and models a performance to some extent. And there's even a 1 second latency between when you hit play and when you hear any audio, during which time Sibelius notation performer is looking ahead in your score and trying to be smart about what it plays. And the end result does not sound as good as Logic or any DAW with east-west emulations or state-of-the-art sample libraries. But it does sound a lot better than what's built into Sibelius. So it ends up being kind of a halfway ground in terms of production quality between the built-in sounds in Sibelius and what you'd really get if you spent a lot of time in a DAW with a top-of-the-line sample library. The use I'm putting it to, I'm trying to squeeze by with it as my tool for making the aforementioned mock-ups of a orchestral. I'm trying to see if I can use that to create mock-ups to give the client a little bit of apology saying the real thing will sound better. And this experiment is still in progress. But if the client is okay listening to the results of playback the Sibelius notation performer, I So everything.
Mike's feed is giving up on him, unfortunately.
I wonder if Sibelius can work with Rewire, if there's anything that can be like some kind of solution that can be done to kind of get Rewire, Logic and Sibelius working together like that.
Well, I'm sure Mike has looked into that already. I don't use Sibelius. Anybody else use Sibelius?
He writes good music. Fifth Symphony, great. Seventh Symphony, even better.
Never use that.
I mean, Sibelius has had rewire type functionality for a few versions now. I remember playing around with that back when I was in college, and I would use VSTs in Sonar and have Sibelius interface with that. It's been a while since I've had to do Sibelius though.
Yeah, I think Mike's back. Are you there, Mike?
Can you guys hear me?
It's a little bit better, but it degraded on you. Sorry about that.
No, I'm sorry. To give you a quick answer to a prior question, and hopefully I'll stay audible, Sibelius does support Rewire, and you can sync it to Logic or anything.
Very cool. I was going to ask a question about, before I forgot, not to derail this subject, but did anybody get the Albion strings stuff they've got, Volume 1, which is on sale right now? And what do you think of it? Yeah.
I love the graphic design.
I do too, absolutely.
I mean, I'm a sucker for tools that look cool, but that looks cool. Like if you're going to design an interface for a classical, for a classical music library, that's the way to do it.
Yeah. I love it. But how's it sound? What do you guys think? Is it a good sale? I mean, there's some philosophy that says, hey, it's so cheap, get it anyway, even if you don't like it. But, I mean, if you had to save that money, it's what, 150 euros right now?
150 pounds.
150 pounds.
A little more, but...
Yeah, it's a little more. So, is it worth the price?
Man. I don't know. It's so weird, actually. I had a couple of local guys that were asking me about, what to buy, especially since not just Spitfire, but a lot of other companies were doing sales. And I always feel like I'm the wrong person to ask because I have such a bare minimum of sounds that I actually work with. I've got my strings, I've got my brass, I got my winds, and there's not much overlap. There's older stuff, but it feels like, I mean, certainly the stuff that they've got sound good, but I think really it's just a matter of does it fit into your workflow? And Albion, just looking at the way that it's organized, it makes sense. I imagine that it will fit into a lot of people's workflows. I know it won't fit into my workflow because I'm very dedicated to tracking my individual stuff with this sort of micro detail with the iwi, so I don't bother with it.
Yeah, you just built your template up again from each instrument, right? You didn't use any kind of mass instruments.
Sorry, say that again?
Sorry, I saw the text come in really quickly, and it seemed to have hit all of us. I heard it all over the place. You built your template up again, didn't you? And you put instrument per chair?
Yeah. Basically, for winds, I've got first chairs and ensembles. For strings, I've got first chairs and ensembles. Same thing for brass, and I'm playing a whole lot of stuff. So for something like a medium-sized 60-piece orchestra, I'm probably recording about 20 tracks worth of stuff.
Oh, okay. So, now, for your ensembles, did you create the ensemble, or are you using somebody's software ensemble?
I create the ensembles. So
Okay.
all the instruments that I use are actually made specifically for solo play.
Gotcha.
So
with that, what did you use for your libraries to get your chairs and all the instruments?
Let's see. It's a combination of sample modeling and Embertone for your for your first chairs. For the ensemble stuff, I'm using Wallander as well as cinema strings. And yeah, and sometimes I'll have other things in there, like some really basic contact stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much my whole template there. Ember
That's
tone,
awesome.
sample modeling, Wallander, and cinema strings.
And your sample modeling is coming from Wallander or somebody else?
No, sample modeling is the company.
Oh. Oh.
Yeah.
So they name themselves after the thing that they do.
Yeah, basically.
Gotcha.
It's pretty cool. I mean, it's done by, what's his name? Peter Siedlczyk, the old advanced orchestra guy from 2 decades ago.
Oh, an unfamiliar name to me, unfortunately.
Yeah, but
So
yeah,
I wonder,
cool stuff.
I wonder what. So you don't need Albion because you've already filled out all your chairs. You've got your ensembles and everything's set to go.
Yeah. I mean, ensembles are just, I don't know. I've been trying different ensembles over the years, and I mean, I got to admit, there are things that I haven't tried. Like I've messed around a little bit with some Spitfire stuff because I have friends that have it.
Mm-hmm.
Messed around a little bit with ATO.
Yeah.
I don't actually do East-West, which is a stark contrast to a lot of people out there. But I don't know. I just like having that individual control over everything. Like
So there's so many of them out there though. There's like you've already mentioned a couple, of course. There VSL as well.
oh yeah.
If you're building your template by chair, how do you decide your favorite first chair violinist? And do you have a different chair, a different sample from a different library depending upon what's going on? Like you got legato chair 1 and you've got a staccato chair 1. I mean, how do you decide which one you're going to use? Or do you choose one that has all those articulations in it and you like it already?
Yes. So one of the nice things about physical modeling type patches is that you rarely see anything having to do with key switching for articulations. Stuff like Wallander and sample modeling is fast enough that just simply doing a short note is enough for it to recognize, oh, you're doing staccato, and that's it. I've got portamento switches and lots of CC data that I use in order to make the performance as opposed to switching between explicit articulations. So it's a particular way of working that is not really the way it works if you're doing Vienna or East-West, but it's something that I've learned over the years to really enjoy.
And is this your writing template or is this your full production template?
Yes. So when I'm writing, I'm very often starting off with improvising on the keyboard plus iPad or with my EWI. And in full production, it's the exact same patches, exact same settings in there.
Nice, because I have a writing template, and then I recently used it and sent it to Mike Shapiro, and he said, "Holy cow, that's terrible."
Oh, really?
I paraphrased.
Wow. Now I'm wondering. I wonder what Mike would actually think about my template.
Mike was absolutely right. It is horrid, but it's like super
Really?
low CPU. I get the point across, and then I can build from there. But it was funny. I thought I lost a friend for a second. It was like radio silence when I sent it to Mike. Hey, what do you think? I think he thought I was kidding. Are you kidding?
There was substantial room for growth.
Well said, diplomatically.
But the music itself, I want to say, was beautiful. It was just the way the clothing that the music wore was kind of dumpster diving quality, but the actual content was great.
Dumpster diving.
Dumpster diving.
Do you know what Mr. Madbrain in the Twitch chat room is asking? I wonder what synth Sakimoto used for the orchestral stuff, like in Final Fantasy Tactics. Do you know?
Oh, I know a little bit about that. Well, I mean, the thing is, the synths were actually done in-house. He had a separate, there was a separate music sound driver programmer at Square Enix, who Sakimoto worked with for things like Final Fantasy Tactics and Vagrant Story. So you can't really trace it back to any particular synths at the time or any samples. It was very much Square Enix's samples that were developed.
How cool would that be to actually have somebody sitting there whose job it was to make you a synth system for you to use to write the music? That's cool.
Yeah.
Hey, Vince, one more question about your template.
Okay.
What the hell is on this window behind you? I know it had nothing to do with your template, but I wanted to segue it.
Let's see here.
There's these heads bobbing back and forth inside boxes for those who can't see, and I am of the type that I would get distracted by that. You guys are seeing this, right?
No.
Here we go.
Oh, yeah, I see.
Look at these bopping heads. It's so Japanese and cool.
Yeah, we have one of those on our kitchen bench, actually. He dances when the weather's fine.
Is that what it is? It's a weather, like...
The one that we have has a little solar panel on the bottom, and when it's sunny, yeah, just like that. Yeah, it's actually exactly the same as that, except
it is exactly the same. Yeah.
Ours is a bear.
I have the bear. Wait a minute, I have the bear. It's right.
Vince is caught in his wires as he tries to get the bear. Are there just two, Alex, or is there more than...
No, there's lots. It's part of is Line, which is like the Japanese version of WhatsApp. Yeah. Actually, ours is not that specific. It's not the Line version, but it's the same, made in the same factory.
Dude, that is unbranded. Cool. My daughter will go crazy for those. So you just put them out so that they can get sunlight, and then they pop their head.
They dance like this.
It's actually a very good panel there. So at night, it just turns itself off. When I come in the morning, after about 4 minutes of the office light being on, it totally starts bobbing its head, and it's kind of interesting to look at.
Wow. Hey, that where do you get those?
Japan.
Probably Japan.
I'm not in Japan presently.
You know, it is possible to find some of those Line toys and goods on Amazon these days, and just even on the American version of Amazon.
I'm going to write just Line toys so I don't forget, and so thanks for the segue, guys. So there was another topic we were going to talk about, and we have like 13 minutes left.
Yes, there was. No, we have 3 minutes, not 13 minutes.
Yeah, but we started like 10 minutes late.
I wanted to just talk about a little cool thing that I did this week, which was kind of interesting, which I'd encourage you guys or anybody to give a try at. It's, the KVR audio forums.
Yes.
Which is a place where I hang out a little bit too frequently. On the KVR forums.
What's your name on there?
It's A-type.
A-type, okay.
Like R-type, except with an A. Anyway, on there they have something called the One Synth Challenge competition, and they are currently at number 79, so they've been doing it for 79 months, which is amazing. Yeah. There's like a prize pool of just various plugins and sample libraries and mostly patch libraries, because I guess they assume that people who'd be interested in doing that are kind of nerdy types like me. And the rules are basically you are to create a piece of music of any length that uses only one plugin, and every month that plugin changes, and it's generally some kind of freeware plugin. And regardless of what the plugin can and can't do, you are tasked with making a piece of music with it. And there's very limited effects that you can use. You're allowed to use native EQ in your DAW, native compression, any kinds of dynamics you can use. You can't use any modulation effects that change the sound of the synth. So you can't use chorus, you can't use phaser, flanger, any of those. You can use a little bit of reverb. However, the reverb cannot have too much modulation in it and can't be like 100% wet or anything like that. So basically, they're wanting to see how far you can take just the plugin on its own with only the bare minimum of tools. And so this, as you can imagine, this kind of thing is right up my alley in terms of interest. So this month, I thought I'd give it a go. And I have to say, guys, you should try it. it was really, really interesting. From a music production point of view, it was actually very, very educational because, this month it was this freeware subtractive synthesizer, which is monophonic, and basically very basic. You've got a pulse wave, a square wave, a saw wave with a saw detune, no stereo panning or anything, one LFO, pretty basic, and a filter, and like a drive circuit, and that's all you have on a noise generator. And yeah, that's all you have to make an entire piece of music. And it was really, really interesting because all of the things that you take for granted when you set about making a piece of music, you need to take back to first principles and create for yourself as a synth patch. So, for example, this plugin, the plugin was called Locomotive, and because of this drive circuit, it has a very sort of chunky kind of industrial sound. So I thought I'd make a piece of like driving techno with it. Okay, yeah. Techno. Well, the first thing I need to do is make a kick. So you need to think about, okay, how do I go about making a kick that has enough energy to drive this kind of techno track? So in the end, my piece of music, which I've finished now, you can actually go to my SoundCloud and listen to it if you like. My SoundCloud is A-Type. It's A-Type 808, A-T-Y-P-E 808. And the track is called Bullet Train. Yeah, actually in the end I did it all in Renoise, and I used 14 instances of the plugin, and three instances of the plugin alone are just responsible for the kick. So for the kick, I have one is doing the click, the initial transient, one is doing the like a sine drop to give that thump sound, and then one is doing a sub down the bottom to give the weight to it. Nice. And then all of that is grouped together in one channel and going through some heavy compression, because what I found with this particular plugin, I don't know if it's trying to be all kind of emulating analog, that kind of shit, but what I found is that it's very, very inconsistent. So every time it would trigger, it would sound slightly different. It's actually because of the noise generator is very unstable. So getting that sort of click transient at the beginning of every kick hit was really really challenging. So in the end, I'm actually sort of pushing the sound through the compressor and using the compressor's controls to get that, the transient for the energy into it instead of using the plugin. So anyway, it was really, really good, and I really encourage, if you've got the time to try it and you're interested in a little bit of synth programming, you should definitely give it a go, because not only does it teach you, it teaches you to approach programming synthesizers from a very, very basic level. How do I create a bass sound? How do I create this kind of percussion? It's all monophonic. How do I get it to sort of space out a little bit without using like chorus or anything like that? So a lot of the time I'm actually doubling up the track and then delaying one of them slightly to sort of do a fake chorus. Or actually using sort of LFO on a pan, so sort of trying to sort of double up a little bit to get a little bit of stereo with, or even just something as simple as panning away from center and actually mixing it so that the pans are much more diverse than you normally would have for dance music. More normally with with EDM stuff, you've got the all the bassy, punchy stuff right down the middle, and then all your synths is like all the way out on the side to keep it all sort of wide, while you have all the energy in the middle. In this case, of course, because you can't do this kind of wide synth stuff. So yeah, as a mixing challenge, it's really good. As a challenge, we're using native EQs, which may not always have the best workflow possible. It was really good. And then, of course, yeah, just from a pure fun of doing something like that, just working to a timeline and getting something done like that was really good. As an added bonus, the community around the One Synth challenge, there seems like a bunch of really nice guys who are just all about having a bit of fun with synthesizers. I would warn you, the other interesting thing about this was, because they're freeware plugins, they're not always very stable. And that was definitely the problem with this one. It was like basically taking music production back 15 years, because there was so many problems with this plugin. Like all of a sudden you'd open your song file and none of the plugins would be making any noise for no reason at all. So you'd have to reinstall it. And then the situation, like the noise generator was unstable, the noise generator would stop working, stuck notes everywhere. So like constantly hammering away at Renoise's stop button, which is the MIDI panic button. Yeah, so just it was just a real good old-fashioned challenge, trying to kind of work within the limitations and then seeing how your creativity kind of responds to that. So definitely I'd recommend you have 15 days left to do this month if you want to, or yeah, definitely in future months. Sometimes the plugins are Windows only, so if you're on a Mac, as I believe three of us are, you need to wait until there's actually a plugin that works on Mac. This month was Mac as well, so which is why I entered. So,
I want to hear this tune, Vince. Do you have it?
Yeah, I think I can. I think I can cue it up. Let's see if this works. So
don't ask Alex if we have permission, though.
I'm just going to do this right now.
Permission or sorry.
We'll get forgiveness later.
This is going to sound great through Google Stream.
Hold on, let me get my moonshine going.
Here we go. I'm starting it right now.
Ooh, I can hear Vince on the other side now. How fancy.
Come on, SoundCloud.
You're going to work?
Huh, SoundCloud. Come on, you can do it.
Go sound. Hey, Alex, I think your music is missing some notes. I don't hear anything.
It is kind of
minimal. It's very minimal, isn't it?
Very minimal.
Yeah, I like that minimalism stuff.
It's a John Cage piece.
That's right.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Ooh.
That was awesome.
Awesome.
There you go.
We all muted our mics just in case. How'd you get the video game sound at the end of it?
That is the LFO has a ramp. Ramp waveform. That's just ramping through a hard sync on a square wave.
Well done, man. That was thoroughly enjoyable.
Did I detect some phaser effect in there, and was that able to squeeze by given the rules of the competition?
There's no phaser effect in there at all. If it is in there, it's just me adding the main bass sound actually has 2 copies of itself, one of them which is very, very slightly delayed behind the other one and about 2 octaves up. So that gives a sort of a fake phasery kind of effect, just to get more interest into that, pretty basic, primitive, monophonic synth.
Well, that was super cool, man. I guess we should go out on that note.
On those notes.
On those notes. Hey, everybody, thanks for checking out the show. Sorry we've been a little bit schizophrenic by popping around between Skype and Twitch and Google Hangouts. What we've been trying to do is make the show better, get some better quality, and in doing that, we realized that Skype might be the answer. And by using Skype, we saw that we could go to Twitch. But the combination of all those things just doesn't seem to work out on my machine. I've done some research and found out that basically to get it to work at its utmost potential, each person in the show, guest and panelist, has to have their own machine. And I only have one spare Macintosh, so I have to try to run this off of this one machine that I have here. And it hasn't been going well. So I think the Google Hangouts is probably our best solution. And then we'll push to Twitch through the software that I use once we figure out how to do that. Video goes through, but audio does not yet. So stick with us. I'm sorry we've been a little bit crazy running around, but I'm going to spend some time after this show just now to figure out how to get the audio to push to Twitch, which you might see me if you're watching Twitch, popping in and out of the Twitch stream. Once we have that stabilized, our flow will be from us live to Google Hangouts through a software that I use to get to Twitch, and audio and video included. So thank you for sticking with us. But please let us know what you think of the show. Let us know if this format's the best. I know we got some feedback with the Skype format that it wasn't great because I was in this tiny little picture and everybody was big, and I'm ridiculously handsome, and people want to be much bigger. So maybe that wasn't the email I got, but that might have been the one I sent to myself. So... so we're trying, and I appreciate you guys really and gals sticking with us through this whole thing. And like us on other places, and tweet us on Twits, and subscribe us on subscribey things. And we will see you next week for episode number 75. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.